Well, I've got to admit that I've kind of witnessed the growth of Royal Enfield, the brand, British born, now domiciled in India. I've witnessed it from afar, sort of like from somewhere else. Haven't been very involved with their models. I've had a lot of cafe races, twins that I know are doing some dirt tracking and flat tracking and stuff, but I really hadn't been riding the things. But what I did know is for a company that almost got sold for a pittance back in 2000, and then had this astronomical growth between 2008 and currently going from 40,000 bikes a year to almost 1 million bikes a year. It's like, holy shit, these guys are doing something right. And a big part of that success was in 2016 when Royal Enfield launched their Himalaya, the original, the OG 410 air-cooled. Kind of weird because it was a 2016 model, but could have been fooled for it being a lot older than that. It was a kind of classic, old school adventure tourer, but enormously successful for Royal Enfield. Wasn't big on performance, but just had this unpretentious, okay, I'll get you there, I'll do the job for you kind of ethos, and that really appealed to people across the world. Yes, they sold sort of, I think 80% of them they sold in India, but really big export market around the world. And in a lot of ways, that being the only model now in Royal Enfield's range that tips its hat to some off-road, but it did huge things to the brand. And I think it's actually probably recalibrated what they thought in the future. So we're actually here down in Victoria for the launch of its evolutionary step, the Himalayan 450, launched just before Christmas 2023. And it is a massive evolutionary step. So look, we've taken you through in a lot of detail on the website, about each of those upgrades, but suffice to say that there's not a shared part, from that original air-cooled 411 Himalayan and this 450. First, obviously sort of starting and revolving around, a much higher performance water-cooled engine, which they're calling Sherpa 450. But, like I said, no shared parts. So everything from bodywork to seat to running gear to suspension. It's got a upside down shower at both ends. Massive changes, absolutely massive changes. And I think what really grabbed people's attention was the fact that it was $9,000 right away. They only announced that late last year. So, in terms of bang for buck, something pretty special. So what is this bike? It comes with a few slogans. I noted a couple down. Some of the marketing slogans are sort of built for all roads and built for no roads, which is kind of cool and clever. And they're sort of saying it's the adventure tourer that has everything you need and nothing you don't. So essentially what it's trying to do is sort of say, like, this bike is all about design philosophy, is all about its capabilities, simplicity, which sort of carries over from its predecessor. But also its versatility. Like I think what the original Himalayan did was sort of say, in its unpretentious way, say to people like, I'm just a tool. I don't have to look fancy or good. I don't have to have bells and whistles and electronic wizardry and cutting edge technology. But I'll get the job done for you there. I'll take you up to the Himalayas, and it did that very well. So obviously this is a huge evolution on that, but it was really interesting talking to the design team, both in UK and India. And the Urban Moto Imports guys here in Australia, sort of talking about how this bike needed to be evolved, but also they wanted to really retain the character and the essence of that original Himalayan because it was so successful, right? Like, it's like a band does a second album, they've evolved it, but no one likes it because it doesn't have some of that DNA which proved so successful, the first time around. So, I think it's just very interesting, and like, interesting also talking to the Royal Enfield guys. They've workshopped the bejesus out of this thing in terms of getting feedback from existing riders from all around the world, taking note of what their distributors are saying in export markets, but most importantly, listening to people who don't ride and who are too intimidated to get on an adventure bike. So hence a non-intimidating 450cc high performance machine. Like I said, there's a lot of detail on our website, so if you want to go into the specs and all that kind of stuff. But what I thought I'd like to do today, look, we've just been 3 days here at a launch. We're based out of Merrijig in the Victorian High Country. We've done 3 days, and I actually thought it'd be a little bit of a scratch around the road and then maybe a little bit of off-road stuff on some fire trail. But to the credit of the Royal Enfield guides and Urban Moto Imports and Cam Donald, who's an Isle of Man multiple Isle of Man winner, who sort of was our tour guide, you know, we went into some snotty stuff. So some really good twisties, some highway stuff to start with as we came out of Melbourne, some great twisties up around Mount Buller, Mount Sterling, around here, and then some pretty damn snotty stuff. So look, what I thought I could do, just maybe from a performance point of view, what jumped out about these sort of various elements of the bike, you know, what jumped out in each of those sort of riding scenarios. So, okay, let's start with highway use. So not a huge front screen, so, you know, obviously you get buffeted around a little bit, and that's par for the course. You know, this thing is not trying to be something that sits on the highway forever. But what did amaze me was, like, it gave a really good opportunity to feel the power. There is a lot more power. You know, you're going about half again in both torque and power figures. So you're up to now sort of 40 horsepower and about 40 newtons of torque on this machine. Hold 6 gear, sits on 5.5, 6,000 revs at $1.20 on the freeway. Great, you know, 450. Who would have thought an adventure bike? So we started off with the tyres, pressures up at 35 psi. The other thing I guess we should mention too is the seat. Nice to have that adjustability. The standard seat's got 20 mil, actually moves up and forward, so can sit a little bit lower on freeway use. When it came to off-road, lifted the thing up. I guess the obvious stuff when you get on this bike is the ergos. I mean, given that the airbox now has moved up here, it's allowed it much slimmer. I mean, if there was criticisms of the original bike, it was that it was very fat through the guts and you had to stand bow-legged on it. That the front brake was a little average, or probably both brakes were a little bit average, and its performance was subdued, shall we say, not too exciting. So this has addressed all that. So really comfortable to sit on highway use, tuck in, your knees tuck in here nicely. So it actually surprised me. It was much better than I thought, you know, when it came to highway use. Probably what surprised me most, well, actually this bike surprised me a lot in a lot of areas, but what surprised me most is when we got on then to some tarmac twisties. It's something with a 21 front inch tyre, but it's masquerading something with a 19. It is amazing how stable it is in a straight line, but then when you tip into corners, it doesn't flop in or want to fall in. It doesn't want to stand up with your gasset. If you hit a big pothole or you know, a series of bumps or corrugations mid corner, it doesn't get out of shape. It feels incredibly planted, and you know, that's something that I know that the Royal Enfield guys pride them on, just in their chassis. And I know that there was an Aussie guy that was you know, like instrumental in developing that. So that was also impressive. You can get fair up it on this thing. So what I like about the engine in those twisties, when you're coming out of slow corners, it retains that torque, like I said, that characteristic of its predecessor, but it revs out way more. Water-cooled engine, much higher performance engine that you get. So, you know, you can hold 5th, 6th gear through some stuff. It'll actually lug, you know, which is pretty surprising for a 450cc. So, you know, that's impressive. But cranking it over and scratching around corners, I saw a couple of boys today that actually dragged pegs. I was dragging my toe a little bit here and there, and when we did a run up to Mount Buller and back today, but very impressive. Seat down feels a little bit better, I think. You just sit into the bike and that lower centre of gravity. The other thing that really amazed me is we did the tarmac twisties after the dirt day. I'll get to the dirt in a moment, but we put the tyre pressure from sort of the mid-30s down to 22-ish PSI. And you know, these CEAT tyres, CEAT, I think it is, developed in conjunction with the bike in India. It just shows that they have a versatility. If you can scratch and drag pegs on the road, you know, with 35 psi, 22 psi, it's saying the tyres are doing, you know, a pretty damn good thing. So let's move off-road. And again, to the guy's credit, you know, for a bike that's said to be unintimidating, man, we went into some of the most intimidating, scrabbly, loose rock, steep ass shit that, you know, you've ever seen. And again, and not just that, we did it on essentially what a road going tyres. So look, when we first got into some single trail, I guess, you know, the first thing you feel is the bike is actually quite agile, you know, even though it carries its weight fairly high, it is pretty bloody agile. It's about 182 plus fuel. So it just comes up full of fuel, 17 litre tank, just shy of 200 kilograms, the magic mark in adventure riding, but it is pretty bloody agile. When you do need to loft the front though, over a sort of little log or something like that, that's when you do feel, you know, the weight of the thing. It carries a lot of this, in order to keep it narrow through here, it carries a lot of that fuel further forward. So lofting the front, doable, and the engine's perky enough to be able to snap it and crack it over, but you do feel that weight a little bit in those scenarios. Also, you know, that's when you start thinking about the suspension when you're off-road, right? So the shower fork's actually pretty bloody competent, you know, and as I said, really amazing on road. Impressive off-road for something that has zero adjustability, but obviously for faster guys, you know, who want to be pushing the thing and hitting G-outs and erosion mounds and whatever, you know, there are some shortcomings there, and it'd be great to have some adjustability. But again, I keep coming back and going like, okay, this thing is built, you know, is built to a price point. As I said, seat up 20 mil, just gave a little bit more leg room, etc. Brakes are bloody good, both road and off-road. I would like a little bit more power out of the front for road. Conversely, off-road, the rear is probably a little bit too powerful, need a little bit more modulation. So, and I guess the other thing that sort of spreads across all those three scenarios, sort of, you know, like highway, tarmac, twisties and dirt, you know, is the electronics on the thing. And again, in keeping with its simple, uncomplicated mantra, you know, you basically have a performance and eco mode, and then within that you've got ABS off, which essentially turns the rear off and intervenes a little bit on the front. So again, braking package, pretty damn good. Let me talk a little bit now. I said we went in some really intimidating terrain, and by that I mean it was gnarly. Taking an enduro bike up there would have been sketchy, right? There would have been 50% of people would have been falling off or losing momentum. So the fact that this thing was capable enough, one, to do it, you know, in an environment was way outside the sort of spec of its, you know, its tyres, was impressive in itself. I thought the motor was particularly good, and that's where you could chug from sort of 3 grand. That's where it starts developing. Sort of 90% of its torque is from 3 grand up, so that it develops from there, and you can use that to chug up hills. We were in between sort of first and second gear because it was so snotty, but it does a bloody good job, and it's got it just refuses to flame out. So that's something that was really impressive for me again, and again, that was a fundamental tenet of this bike, that it had to have that you know, that torquey sort of character. So speaking pretty positively about it, you know, like if there was a wish list, and by the way, in that stuff, I put the thing down. Mine, ironically, was the only bike where they had these extra crash protection, and I'm sure I saved my engine cases there. You know, I just locked the front on the downhill, and you know, and going up was really good. Coming down, I would say, is where you start to feel the bike's weight a little bit. So we were really in terrain that this bike is not built for. Well, okay, riders who will gravitate toward this bike shouldn't have been doing what we were doing yesterday by rights. And we had a couple of inexperienced guys with us. So I went down. That's where you sort of start to feel the weight of the bike. So while it is a nimble 450 and is flickable, you know, when you need to muscle it and brake where it's sketchy and like really sketchy on downhill, you do feel the weight a little bit. So coming back to a wish list, well, you know, you can sort of look at a few things like the, you know, like the brake pedal and the gear shifter, and you can sort of say, oh, they're steel and they'll easily bend, etc. But again, it's a $9,000 bike right away. I think also the brakes, you know, I sort of talked about how they could be improved a little bit. And I guess the one other thing on the wish list is, you know, I talked about what this thing did on what's essentially road-going tyres, like throwing a set of knobbies on the thing, you know. It way exceeded what I thought it was going to be capable of off-road, way exceeded it. So, you know, I think in terms, if we come back to what we're talking about, the brief, in terms of, you know, simplicity, capability and versatility, the fact that, you know, with its low seat height, and it can be a really unintimidating way into adventure tour riding for somebody who's really inexperienced, you know, right through to something, I guess, with a set of knobbies. I mean, we did some stuff, like I said, it was going to be challenging on an enduro bike. So, you know, hats off to the guys here at the launch. It was really good to have Mark Wells, who's the Chief of Design, out here to get some real insights into this bike and the process of how it was conceived and developed. Also the guys from APAC, who are based out of Royal Enfield APAC, who are based out of Thailand, but in particular the Urban Moto Import guys, who are the distributors here in Australia, and a really, you know, passionate bunch of guys who really believe in the product and really know, you know, they've seen the meteoric rise of, you know, of this just being one of their brands, of Royal Enfield, but seen not only the astronomical growth over the last little while, but they're kind of really backing it with what they do through dealers and launches, etc. And having access to, you know, some of that design team, and you know, has been really fascinating. So, you know, it's I know talking to Joe, the CEO of Urban Moto Imports, he said it's sort of unprecedented interest in terms of, you know, one of their models. So they're very, very positive and ambitious about what they can do with this thing. And I think, given what I've experienced over the last few days, a total of, I think, 450 kilometres and 120 plus of that off-road in all sorts of conditions. From my take on the thing, given the price point of $9,000 right away, I think, they're well justified to think this thing is going to sell a mozza. So I think it'll just be really interesting to see what happens from now. It's been a huge tick for Royal Enfield, and I think it'd be lovely to see. Who knows? There may be a family of adventure tourists coming up soon. The guys were dropping a few hints about that, so it'll be really interesting to watch this space. But if you get a chance, these things are, I think, just landing in Aussie dealers as we speak. Now in March, and I know that they've had a dealer demo program through February. So if you get a chance, get out and have a ride on the thing, both road and off-road, and I think it's really going to surprise you.